Tonight we're here to welcome a writer who, according to all reports, already shut the city down last night at the Chicago Ideas Festival, who rules Twitter with an iron fist and a sequined glove, and whose prose, in the words of the New York Times, reads like fevered poetry. Saeed Jones' memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives, started showing up in AWM's inboxes last year with notes like, you have to read this is the book we need right now, this is the best thing I've ever read, if you don't get him here, I will burn the place to the ground. So thank you for being here. Nevertheless, we have the fire department on standby. His memoir explores what it means to be young and black and gay and creative in an America that's hostile to all those things at once. And through stories of writing his way into the world, he tells us all what it means to be human. His debut, Prelude to Bruise, won the 2015 Penn Joyce Osterwell Award for Poetry and the 2015 Stonewall Book Award Barbara Giddings Literature Award. The poetry collection was also a finalist for the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award, as well as awards from Lambda Literary and the Publishing Triangle in 2015. Welcome, Saeed.
Hi. Thank you, Allison. And thank you whoever threatened to burn down I was gonna come. Chicago is a pretty reliable stop on most book tours, but hey. I see you. This is a delight. Allison
Thanks
gave me,
for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for being here. Your time is so valuable. There's so many things you could be doing in the midst of our ongoing constitutional crisis. I think I should be reading about Syria right now. I don't know, my nigga. What's going on? So here we are. So I will try to earn your time. But also, Allison, thank you for giving me a tour of this space. This is really special and thoughtfully created. So thank you. And yeah, Chicago has a vital literary history. So it's nice to see this here.
Oh, thank you. We like to think so.
Rightfully so. Rightfully so.
You were going to open with a passage from the book that talks about some of what we're going to discuss here tonight.
Yeah. So I'll read that, and then we're going to talk, and then I'll read the poem that kind of opens the book, and then if you have questions, I hope you do. I love to answer them, and it's all good. This chapter is the end of the third act of the book. Spoilers, there are fights in this book called How We Fight for Our Lives. And all you need to know is I'm a senior in college at this point. I go to a New Year's Eve party in Phoenix, Arizona, where ASU is, to visit some friends. I went to school in Western Kentucky University. I had dreadlocks at the time, which were pretty long, so that figures into the writing. And the one other thing you need to know is that just the dynamics of what you were talking about, the peril that we were all aware of in different ways of America saying your identity will never be welcomed here, will never be enough here, have basically metastasized at this point. So I'm deeply depressed and angry about it and ready to burn down the house. So I'll read that to start. It's a great mood, Bender. I love someone who follows along in the book. 125. I skip a couple of paragraphs, but we'll get through it together. Yeah, chapter 15. December 31st, 2007, Phoenix, Arizona. A joke I used to repeat in those days was, why be happy when you can be interesting? I knew how to be interesting. There was power in being a spectacle, even a miserable spectacle. The punch and the line. Interesting. Sentences like serrated blades, laughter like machine gun rounds, a drink in one hand, a borrowed cigarette in the other. If you could draw enough glances, any room could orbit around you. That New Year's Eve, I wound up at a party that was exactly like every party I had ever been to. An iPod hooked up to a pair of speakers, an awkward costume theme I tried and failed to adhere to, and an apartment clogged with white people. The only difference was that I was getting wasted in Phoenix, Arizona, instead of Bowling Green, Kentucky. And in the few days I'd been there, I had concluded that Arizona was perhaps the whitest place I had ever visited. It was like stepping onto the surface of a very well-lit moon. The party's theme was the future, which is why more than half the people in attendance were wearing some combination of synthetic fabric and aluminum foil and sunglasses. I hadn't known that there would be a theme, and the only other shirt I packed was a blue calico button-down, so I put my dreadlocks into two pigtails and kept telling everyone I was Dorothy. No one found this in any way strange because, of course, this was the future, and all bets are off in the year 2075. For the first few hours of the party, either I didn't notice him, or the man who would later try to kill me simply had not arrived yet. All night, I was a terrific, bright black mess. I stomped, slinked, sauntered in and out of the kitchen to refill my cup or do shots. I shouted orders about songs that should be added to the party's playlist. Out on the porch, smoking cigarettes, then passing around a blunt, I stared at an orange tree just out of reach until I finally plucked off a fruit. It seemed miraculous. Oranges in the dead of winter. Then I realized the unseen side of the fruit was rotted, ants pouring out of the ruin like ink. Looking back, I can see how someone might see me that night and argue that I had it coming, that I had a man like him coming. If that someone was America herself, I can understand how she might rattle off a warning. That black boy has been too hungry for too long. One of these nights, he's going to bite off more than he can chew. I will say for myself, America, I did the best I could with what I was given. The man, let's call him Daniel, looked familiar when I saw him from across the room, as if each part of him had been borrowed from some other boy or man I had wanted. Leaning against the wall, dispassionately sipping a beer, he was the kind of quiet I have noticed in certain men and long hungered for. The silence of men who have it all and thus find it all boring, who don't exert the energy necessary to flirt, persuade, or convince, because they know America will come crawling to them on hands and knees. I realize now that what I wanted was not just the bodies of such men, but their power, and what they could use that power to do to the rest of us. The brutal exertion of will, destiny made manifest by the unspoken threat their muscled bodies and white skin posed. I hungered for the power of the all-American man, the Marlboro Man and the Marlboro Man's firstborn son, the high school quarterback, the company's future CEO, Ernest Hemingway, John Wayne, Odysseus, Hercules, Achilles, the shield itself, the stone-cut archetype, the goddamn everyman, the golden boy, the one. If I could not actually be the one myself, I thought I could survive by devouring him whole. The more straight, the more masculine, the more I wanted to see him with his legs spread or up, back arched in an orgasm that did not just bring him pleasure, but a warning. In spite of the man you say you are, in the future I live in, men like me are coming to conquer you, and we will take no prisoners. This is what I thought it meant to be a man fighting for his life. If America was going to hate me for being black and gay, then I might as well make a weapon out of myself. Thank you. Hello. Hi.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you first is, how you became a writer. So your journey towards writing, what drew you to writing initially, and who were some of the writers along the way who you found to sustain you during that time?
I became a writer because I was a passionate reader. I really think writing, like if, you read books casually, and we all do. There's some books we just read and you just get through it, And then there's books you underline, you highlight. There are books you talk to other, you're like, you've got to look at this. Let me text you a line from, you know what I mean? And then, you're writing in the margins. And then so to me, writing, cultural criticism, book reviews, that is where it all begins. The passionate reading at some point becomes, you know what, this is so lit. Let me sit down and actually do my own thing. How could you not read Gwendolyn Brooks, right? How could you not read Toni Morrison and be like, let me go, like, have my own party, And so that's where writing started with me, my own party. And then, women. All of my memories of the books that made their way to me, in middle school, in high school, in college, it was really, before I was formally studying writing, it was women. My mom, who, she was a single parent. She studied college for a couple of semesters, but couldn't afford it. But she kept all of her books. So in the first chapter, you see me pick up her copy of James Baldwin's Another Country. And that was because her copy of The Color Purple, I was like, a woman's talking about her pussy. No. And I tried to read Toni Morrison, who, has since then become just hugely important to me, but I did not have the range. Ooh, my public school education in Louisville, Texas had not prepared me for like circular plot and all of these things. I was like, no. But I picked up Another Country, and you see it, and I just sit down on the floor in my living room. And so, that was an inheritance from my mother. And in school, I did speech and debate, and so, my speech coach was really good, and so she'd be like, here's this book by Elin Harris. I think you should read it, because she didn't want to say like, yeah, you gay and he gay, read it. She was trying to be very polite. But again, I remember reading and opening the book, and I think the first sentence of his memoir or something, What Becomes of the Broken Heart is his memoir, and he's like, I'm a black gay man. I was like, so those kinds of moments. And then, as I kept reading and studying writing formally, Tiare Jones, who I know has been here, the first chapter of the book I wrote in graduate school in her class. And she was like, oh, this is okay. She was like, talk about, the experience, not just like use the book to get to the photograph, that's very important to the plot, but she was like, no, talk about the experience of being a reader. That's great. So those kinds of experiences. And, Rigoberto Gonzalez, who was my first gay instructor, who was a man of color. He grew up in Mexico and then in California, and like that was important. And he has a wonderful memoir, Butterfly Boy, that's about his relationship with his father and his brothers, and just seeing people, Maya Angelou, just seeing people tell the truth about themselves. And I think the memoir form has always been something I really gravitated toward, because I don't know. I think maybe because it's easier to produce a book, obviously, than a movie or a TV show. Books, there's a lot of radical work in books that if you're fortunate enough, you can kind of stumble into. And, now we have Pose and we have these, Moonlight and Lena Waithe and Janet Mock and all these people are and Sarah Broom and Dee Rees, her partner, are making these films. But books have had a lot of this outsider storytelling for quite some time, and I was lucky enough to really stumble into it. And you see immediately, as soon as I'm reading Another Country, I go and hide in my room because I think I'll get in trouble if my mom sees it.
It's there was someone who once said, that if you really want to get to know someone, have them text you a picture of their bookshelves.
Ooh, true.
And that's, because when you tell people about the books that you love, you're telling them about what you love and what's important to you.
Yeah, the thing is, people say like being gay is a choice, and I'm like, not so, because men are trash. And yet, and I gotta tell you, how many dudes don't even have bookcases in their houses at all to say anything of good books? But, oh my God, it's just all like a column of like, startup companies for dummies, like those yellow... Great, whatever, but they fine though. But no, I think it's actually one of the joy. And a friend point, I just moved to Columbus, Ohio, and so I was like setting up, and a friend was with me helping me all these books, and he was like, this is awesome. I'm getting to know you. He was like, this is such a cool way, because he was like, people don't have like typically like record players and the album collection, all of these things that used to be conversation starters and a way to literally surround yourself with the story of your loves and your passions. But books are a way to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you worked in poetry, and now you're moving into memoir. How has your writing process changed over time and in moving from one form to another?
I'm a master compartmentalizer, and you see in the book it really comes from like just identity politics and me being like, I think if we're all a pie, and in our identity, it's like, you grew up with like this class politics and your family and religion and identity and race and health, whatever. And often I think we're like, how many pieces of the pie can I bring into this space? That really impacted me growing up. So I'm really good at compartmentalizing and being like, forget prose for a second. It's all about poetry. But that said, yeah, I think I write poems like a sociopath. I write one line. Usually poems start with like an image or usually the title or the first sentence. So just imagine it, like this phrase that's in your head and it's like kind of annoying you because you can't stop thinking about it until you go home and write. So I write the first line, and then I try to write the second line, like particularly like listening to music or playing an instrument, and then it's like, you mess up. And I draw a dash, and I write the first line again, and I write the second line again. I'm like, okay, we're good. And we get to the third line, draw a dash, and I start. That's how. So I'm revising as I'm going, which is to say I don't know where my poems are going to end up. If you read my poetry, it tends to be pretty suspenseful generally because it's like I didn't know that was going to happen to Boy at the end of one of the poems in Prelude to Bruise. You can't write a memoir like that. I tried. I would write the first paragraph of a chapter or even the first chapter of the book and stop and start over, and I was like, well, I'm literally never going to finish this book. So I think I had to learn to chill out a bit and to trust that I would get an opportunity later to go back, that it wasn't the worst thing if the chapter or even the page wasn't perfect that day. I could figure it out. And so it's kind of like being kinder to yourself. I'm not very kind to myself as a poet. I don't think it's about being nice to myself. I think it's about being perfect. But like with writing a book, you just have to be more generous because it's a marathon. And I think poems are a sprint.
So a lot of memoirs, you read them and they're distancing. You can tell that the writer is, making sense of something by putting it away from themselves and curating it and saying, look, observe how this happened to me. And you don't do that. This book feels very intimate, and you feel very close to everything that's still happening. Was that a conscious choice on your part, and how did you bring that across, that intimacy with that story?
I don't know. It's funny. I was like, are most memoirs like that? That sounds terrible. I don't know. I don't think it was a conscious choice. I think, having worked in media and just watching it, I obsess over it. And like the New York Times drives me crazy, as it does many people. And one of the reasons the New York Times drives me crazy is because they're like, we're the paper of record, and we don't make mistakes, right? Like that's the culture of their work. And of course, it's made by humans. I think the New York Times does a lot of great work, but of course you're gonna make mistakes. And so knowing that, I've just developed this ethos of like, I think it's better to admit we make mistakes. And I think it's better if someone asks you a question you can't answer, and you say, actually, I don't know. And I think that moment, and we've all had this, right, with bosses or professors who you ask them and they go, I don't know, I'll figure it out. And you're like, because one, what a moment of trust, what a moment of humanity and compassion. They have decided to honor your humanity instead of continuing to perform their superiority. So they've earned a lot of trust from you, but also that means when they speak confidently, you believe them, you trust them more. And so I think with the memoir, I wanted to enact that ethos. A memoir is a product of memory, right? Our memories are incredibly unreliable. There is so much science, and you don't need the science, just anecdotally. What happened yesterday? I don't know. Try to recount a conversation. I do countless interviews, and I'm surprised by how often I say or I don't remember that because that information isn't technically important to my memory, but it happened and it's true, So I wanted to write a memoir that recognized this and recognized that memory and its unreliability is a part of identity formation. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves are how we become who we are. And so I wanted to embrace all of that instead of running from it because I just think that's what a good memoir should do.
Were there times that you found yourself too close to something to tell it? Were there times when you had to back away?
Yeah. Initially, the book was going to be a little bit more narrow because I am young. I'm 33. I sold the book in 2015, and now that the book is out, I'm like, thank God, y'all can just read it and actually realize I am a bad bitch. But that whole time period, I was just surrounded by people going like, aren't you a little young to be writing a memoir? Aren't you a little young to be, So I was like, I get it, I know, So initially, I was trying to be very conservative and limit it to 1998 to 2008, and what you're almost at the end at that point. But my mom is a huge part of the story, and my mom passed away. She had a heart attack the night before Mother's Day in 2011, and I've talked about this experience. I'm pretty public on Twitter, and people know it. And so my editor was like, "It'll be weird. Like readers might feel jilted, actually, if they get to the end of the book, and she's a part of it from the very beginning, and then her story is cut off." She's fighting for her life too, so I had to expand it. So I knew that, but I still had, I was still working on, a college section or something at the time. And basically it was time, I was writing, I was in my apartment in Harlem at the time and writing, and I finished one chapter and I didn't want to stop that day, and I realized that the logical next chapter would be when I got the phone call on the night before Mother's Day. And I burst into tears. And I'm not an emotional writer. I don't think of it as catharsis. I think of it as craft work, But I just hadn't prepared myself. It wasn't like the weeks coming up, okay, let's build, have you thought about the traps and all? I hadn't at all. And so I remember Solange's A Seat at the Table album had just come out that Friday, and I think this was Saturday. And I tend to play songs on repeat while I'm writing so that the words just cease to be words. And it was Cranes in the Sky. So it's just Cranes in the Sky is playing over and over, and I'm just sobbing in front of my computer because I was overwhelmed. That was, a relatively recent experience. And grief is traumatic, but unlike other types of trauma, grief really is not linear. I guess no trauma is, but I think grief is really wild. And so, I'm fine. I'm okay, but who's to say that if I walked through the audience and one of you had on a perfume that my mom liked, that and smell is a powerful sense, that I might not be totally thrown, It just doesn't obey the same rules. And so the focus, the kind of line by line, paragraph by paragraph discipline I have was upended. And a friend had to come get me, and we just went and drank. All night, drank all night,
Fair.
all night.
Fair.
Yeah, right. Sometimes you do it. Sometimes I'm not one of those writers who alcohol helps the writing. No, alcohol helps the living, but it doesn't help. It doesn't make the writing. I can't if I have 2 glasses of wine, I can't write anything. But yeah, it helped me calm down, and we talked, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to survive this book. I remember saying that to him, this is just a tall order, and oh my goodness. And then next weekend after work, I sat down and I got back to work.
Well, you're excavating so many things that you think you've dealt with,
Right.
But then, oh, wait a minute, no, I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's interesting that your editor would say, that you need to consider how the readers are going to feel about how your mother's story ends.
Right, yeah.
And
it's very
so-
smart and very compassionate.
Very smart and very compassionate, but when you say it like that, you're like, are you kidding me? This is, this is the way the story goes, right? So where's that line between, are you communicating to readers? Are you communicating to yourself? Are you communicating to yourself as a young man?
That's beautiful. At that point, we were several years into working on the book. I was lucky enough that when I took the book out on proposal, so I had 100 pages or 75, and my bio, that kind of the thing you read, cute, and he's got a lot of followers on Twitter, and publishers are like, ooh, oh my gosh, what is Twitter? That's exciting. So 8 different publishers ended up wanting to bid on the book. So I got to meet all of these really generally, well, some of them were terrible, but like 6 of them were really smart and wonderful people. And I got...
Tell me which two.
Oh, yeah, I'll spill the Kiki girl later. One of them said something so sexist, I was stunned. And it wasn't the editor, it was the salesperson. I'll tell you, we'll talk, we can talk about it. I'm all about transparency. I don't want to perpetuate toxicity by pretending everything's cool. But anyway, I got to meet a lot of smart people, generally speaking, and then I settled on this editor, and what a joke, he's like a straight, white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired dude from Connecticut, but he's just really great. And I was like, wouldn't have expected you were the person, but he was, and we had such a great relationship that I just feel that by the time he was ready, and I remember how nervous he was. He was like, can we meet for drinks to talk? And usually we would meet to eat, because we're not like totally alcoholics, we're just like casually. And I was like, okay. And I just remember he was like, tapping and fidgeting. And it was because he was about to ask, which is such a high order of a person, can you write about your mother's death? Do you want to sit up with somebody and ask them to do that? I wouldn't, but we had such trust. And I understood what he was trying to say. And honestly, Allison, as he was saying it, this happens sometimes. You've been thinking maybe through something, and then someone finally echoes the truth back to you, and they're going through and you're like, I got you. I get it. That's what it felt like. And I'm so grateful. The truth is that as much as this book is about me and what I'm going through, my relationship with my mother is the soul, is the organizing principle of the book. Even that, like at this party where I'm like, and she's not a part of it. And I'll read a poem later that I think kind of colors that relationship a bit for you if you haven't read the book yet. But, even when she's not there, what's happening is about the contrast. It's about the fact that she is so distanced by me from that part of my life. And what does it mean when we decide, for whatever reasons, like my mom and I in this case had a great relationship but weren't great about talking about me being gay. What does it mean when you love someone very much but you decide to hold that part of yourself away from them? And you're still a young person coming of age, and America's terrifying. Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, right? And you're trying to figure all that out on your own, but here you are cut off from the wisest, most loving people you know. So, inviting the full story of my relationship with my mother into the book, I think, honestly, made everything else make more sense. Yeah.
So the reception that the book has gotten has been tremendous.
It's been
The
pretty great.
reviews, yeah, the reviews are raves. People can't get enough of it. Have there been any reactions that you weren't expecting?
I try not to expect too much. Because that's how you set yourself up for a disappointment, or not listening to what people are saying. When we like set up a whole scene of a conversation before you show up to the dinner or whatever, like whatever people are saying is having to like get through the beautiful scene you've written in your imagination. I was lucky enough that when galleys went out this summer to people like you, to booksellers and librarians, I was starting to get like little bits of feedback, and I was noticing the range, the diversity of readers that were connecting to the book, and that was great. I would have been fine if only Black queer people were resonating with the book. That's dope. Fuck y'all. I'm just here for my people. But it was cool too for people to be like, oh, I'm a mom. I'm going through this. I'm totally different, but I'm going through this too, So that's great. And then, yeah, I mean, when you've dealt with all these people being like, aren't you a little young to be writing a memoir? And then you wake up one morning, as I did like a week ago, and I'm in my hotel room on my book tour, which is already surreal, and there's the New Yorker comparing my writing to John Milton's Paradise Lost. Yeah, that's fucking awesome. Oh my goodness.
In the best way.
Wow, yeah. I mean, if the story is my anxiety about like, will I ever be fully welcomed? Will my whole self ever be welcomed, to say nothing of being honored by America? And to have the New Yorker or the New York Times or NPR like being like, yeah, we will. Like, this is cool. Yes, of course that's great. But that has nothing to do with the reality of the book. And then I try to remember that too. So you're always like kind of dancing. I'm not going to pretend that praise, that critical reception isn't something I value. Duh. We remember, everyone in here got here because of other people saying their names, right? But the work, at the end of the day, I would like to believe that when Gwendolyn Brooks, sat down on her couch after, writing a poem, she had already kind of completed the circle for herself. And that's what I try to do. I try to remember, like, have you completed the circle for yourself? And when I finished the book and took a few months before I read it again, and got the galley and read it, I was like, I completed my circle. Yeah.
So in terms of, people say that when you write, that every book teaches you how to write the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you learn about writing from writing this book?
Wow. Yeah. There's a little bit of humor. It's quick. It's like, you better laugh now before the next, like, kind of fist comes at you. But yeah, like, making space for humor that you can write, artistic and of literary merit and invite more colors of yourself into the book. I think I'm a pretty bold writer, and I'm fine writing about myself. I'll just, like, lay it all out, you know what I mean? And that chapter in particular, it's really like Saeed's messiness on full display, It's like, it's like a sentient form of gay Twitter or something, just like disaster, And so that was wild. But the real challenge of the book was writing about family members. My mom is not alive. She cannot advocate for herself. Right? She can't sit there and say, excuse me, hi, I have a question, My grandmother and our relationship is very complicated, and you see us at our worst together when I'm younger in the book. And she knew I was writing the book in grad school when my mom called her to tell her I was writing a memoir. And I was like, what'd she say? She just said, uh-oh. And then I sent her the galley this summer, and she, particularly about this, she was like, the middle is raunchy. And I was like, yes, put it on the jacket. Well, she was like, I don't know how to say it, but it's kind of raunchy. Like, there was a whimsy. It wasn't like a judgment raunchy. I was like, oh, I'll pick it up what you're putting down, Mildred. And she was like, the way you write about your mom at the end is very beautiful. And I started crying. And then I was like, okay, but what about the beginning? Because that's when things are really rough. And she just said it brought back a lot of memories. So I think what this book has empowered me to do, and so that's like huge trust, right? She's not trying to reframe. She's not doing PR. She's not like fake news, Saeed, She's just like, brought back a lot of memories. It is what it is. I think I've learned that it's possible for me to write about other people with deep compassion and nuance. And I usually have avoided doing that because, I just like create characters because I was just like so afraid of being inhumane. And it's totally possible. It's totally possible to tell a good story, a good yarn that is just mean and virulent. And I just didn't want to do that. So I think if my grandma can read the book and be like, you captured it, then that feels like something that empowers me to take more risks moving forward. Yeah.
So what is the next project?
I don't know. In part because things are so loud right now, It's really hard to think when people are praising you. As it turns out. I don't know. I mean, maybe y'all can think. I can't. I'm just like, I just find, I don't know. I feel like blasted by praise. And part of it is I'm not really great at accepting compliments. It's taken a lot of work. I'm better. This is a vast improvement. I used to like immediately start apologizing when someone would compliment. I used to immediately start pointing out all the things that, and my aunt said, Saeed, you're disrespecting them. Someone walks up to you and says, I really loved, Prelude to Bruce, and you go going, well, it's not that good. Da, da, da. You're disrespecting what they've offered you. And so she just said, if someone gives you a compliment you don't feel you're ready to receive, just say thank you and make a vow to someday get there. So, right now, that's kind of where I am, just like, thank you. And then being like, New York Times, New Yorker, and not trying to make decisions based on it. I don't want to write anything based on the praise. I want to let the praise go to my agent and the publisher and Hollywood and whoever, the people who make decisions that empower me to have capital to continue to make art, right? But when it comes to when I sit down to actually write, all I want to do is keep fighting for my life. That's the only kind of thing I'm interested in terms of my work. So I know I need to wait. But I've started writing poems again. Some people are apparently excited about that. There's someone said, someone was like, "Saeed, you're like the Frank Ocean of poetry. I don't know when it's gonna come. You're just gonna drop it." And I was like, oh, "Okay, thank you." So if I ever dye my hair, that's how you know. So that, and I've tried to start writing fiction. Yeah. I think it'll be a while before I write another memoir. I hope. It takes a while before I have material for another memoir, first of all. But also, it's just such a difficult, rigorous form because it's not just enough to write a beautiful page, right? You can write something that's beautiful that is factually inaccurate, right? Like what James Frey's memoirs, it's actually a beautiful book. It's inaccurate, it's not true. You can write something that's factually accurate and beautiful, but it's emotionally false. You're lying to yourself, you know? And so it was just like it was so many deleting beautiful. Well, I would copy and paste them and be like, well, maybe that can go in a poem one day, honestly. But like, you know, enough of like, it's great, but it's not what we're here to do. And so it felt like running like the triathlon where you're like, we're done running, I'm so tired. And it was like, now it's time to swim, nigga. So I'm excited to like write poetry or fiction that's a little less rigorous.
You mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that, you know, there's a lot of radical work that took place in books, and it feels like we're in a great place in literature in terms of people being asked to tell their own stories in their own voices. And I'm wondering who some of the writers are that are working now that really excite you and interest you, and you want to see what they do next.
Ooh, I love this part. Well, I'm reading. I left it at home because it's a book that I'm highlighting and writing in, and I was terrified that I would lose it on the road. But Gia Tolentino's book, Trick Mirror, it's bit memoir. Of course, she writes for The New Yorker. She's quite one. If you want your introduction to Gia, read her piece on Robin's song Honey. It's just really beautiful. But so the book it's part memoir. It's like essays, but cultural criticism, and it connects, I think, identity and being a woman of color in this world with technology. And so the first chapter of the book is called The Internet and I mean, it will knock you flat. Like, it's just like, she explains it. She explains why we love social media, you know, and the internet so much in the way we do when we know it's a mess and it often makes us unhappy in real time. But why are we still with it, you know? And she notes that even if you're not on Twitter or Facebook, you know, these tech platforms are shaping our identities. Wow. So that's great. Dinesh Smith is, of course, wonderful. And I feel they are just really prolific. Actually, I feel like Dinesh has published like 3 poetry collections since I was working on this one book. And Morgan Parker, I think, is incredible. She has a YA book out right now. And her last poetry collection came out in the last fall called Magical Negro. The reason I draw attention to her, she's doing something I would like to do one day, which is I feel she really is actually able to capture her full self, the humor, the da-da-da-da-da, ha-ha, the brilliant Columbia-educated intellect on the page all at once. And I still, like, you get like a little of the humor and da-da-da-da, but I'm still like I'm still buffering on the page. So I really admire that. To read her work is to have a more full sense of who she is. Yeah.
We always ask that because I've noticed people oftentimes, if they don't want to talk about themselves, always love to talk about their talented
so
friends.
Much easier. I could have literally done like a whole interviews about Gia Tolentino. That'd be great.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. So I wanted to ask if we could, you mentioned a poem that you wanted to read, and then we can take a few questions.
Right on. So yeah, this is just how the book opens. Everyone here looks grown, so I don't have to explain who Prince is. That's a relief. I was teaching once, and I mentioned Alanis Morissette, and I just looked up at a classroom of kids looking at me like, who the fuck are you talking about? And it hurt my feelings. Okay. And then I found out they were trolling me, actually. They
knew? Okay, good.
Kids are jerks. Okay. Elegy with grown folks music. I Want to Be Your Lover comes on the kitchen radio. And briefly, your mother isn't your mother. Just like if the falsetto is just right, a black man in black lace panties isn't a faggot, but a prince, a prodigy. And the woman with your hometown between her hips shimmies past the eviction notice burning on the counter, and her body moves like she never even birthed you. The voice on the radio pleads, I want to be the only one that makes you come running. Some songs take women places men cannot follow. Spinning, she looks at but doesn't see you. Spinning, she sings lyrics too fast for you to pursue. Spinning, she doesn't have time for questions like, what is this nasty song? And where did she learn to dance like that? And why? And who is this high-pitched bitch of a man who can sing like a woman and turn your mother not into your mother, but a woman? Not even a woman, but a box-braided black girl, a fast girl, a chick, a vanity 6. And how far away she is from you, right here in the same living room, dancing with the song's hook in her throat. And you hate the voice coming through the radio because another sissy has snatched your dreams and run off with them. And because you are young and don't know the difference between abandoned and alone, just like your mother's heart won't know the difference between beat and attack. She will be dead in a decade. And maybe you already know what you are losing without knowing how. But you're just a boy for now. And your mother is just a woman, just a girl, body swaying, fingers snapping, and snakes in her blood. Thank you, guys.
All right, we've got time for a couple of questions. Just a reminder, a question is one sentence that ends in a question mark. If you have a comment or a soliloquy or a death threat or a marriage proposal from anyone in this room and you'd like to make it, I have an air horn I will blow until you all sit down.
Okay. Well, if it's a marriage proposal, let's hear them.
Okay. Oh, all right. I'm sorry. The marriage proposals are welcome.
Chills, girl. You got to play.
All right. With that said, who wants to go first?
That's a great question. Yeah, I was about a year ago, I was really struggling. It was hard, as many people are, because why wouldn't you be? I said this in Minneapolis. I was like, honestly, if you're not fighting for your life, you're a sentient Klan hood. If you ask someone how you're doing, they're like, great, run. You know, because surely, obviously, the rest of us, our minds are spinning, right? With trying to figure out, like, oh, man. And so, yeah, therapy is great. I thank my therapist in the acknowledgments of the book. And I'm sincere. I'm not trying to be, silly when I say that. I didn't expect it, but he, I think, had the insight to know, wow, what you're doing, both in terms of the writing process, but then you're about to share all of this, as you drew attention to, with people. We need to talk about this. So we talked about the writing process a lot, and he really made space to talk about the public self. And how do you feel about navigating? What's it like being on Twitter and then da-da-da-da-da? And yeah, at first I was like, why are we talking about this, But I really appreciated it. And so I felt empowered. I felt, I don't know what other people feel like when your mental health is great, but I just feel calm. And I feel like I can actually listen and experience what's happening without it just sending me spinning, Yeah, and so I was really grateful to be able to get to that place with him over the course of the last year. Because, yeah, I want to be fully present. I want to listen and honor your questions. I think this book is it's its own thing, but also it's an opportunity for me to be in these spaces with y'all, And I wanted to do what I needed to do to really be able to be here with y'all. Yeah, thank you. I didn't get to study with her, but no. I was a Cave Canem Fellow in 2012. And she was there. So I studied with her like for one day. It's like a different instructor every day. And she just said, it actually relates to kind of what you were saying. She was, and slightly different, she gave an incredible, if you haven't, you should look up Nikki Finney's National Book Award acceptance speech. She walks out and it's like literature. and some idiots were like, why did you already write what you were going to say before you went? Isn't that arrogant? Like, da-da-da-da-da. And at Cave Canem, someone asked her about it, not like in a dumb way, but in a thoughtful way. And she just said, when that door opens, it's only going to be open for a few seconds. And if you don't already have something in your hands, why walk through? And I think about that a lot. So I was like, well, I'm good. That's the Nikki Finney education course. Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah. That's a good point. Well, I started writing in earnest 2011 and sold the book in 2015. So I've been working on those 7, because really when you take a book out on proposal, you really have to convince people that like, you know what you're doing and that you have a sense of, even though that changed, But so I made sure those 75 pages were like flawless, as close as I could get them to be. And so what I read you, like that chapter is actually a part of it. The first chapter, like really the tent poles of the book. The first chapter, that scene in Phoenix, Arizona, that chapter, and the throwdown with my grandmother in part 2, I'd written those. So, and I feel like because those were the tent poles, I think that helped a lot. So yeah, I always tell people, a lot of people are doing work and want to have books one day, and wonderful, I welcome you. Think about when you are ready to invite cooks into your kitchen, when you are ready for people to attach a monetary value to the work it's different. It was, and I try to be transparent. I sold this book like the 8 Simon & Schuster was like $300,000, and I was like, yes. Are you ready to be on the hook for $300,000 for your writing? Like that's great and a blessing and everything, but like the moment I signed that contract, I like started sweating. So I think it's important to know that like Toni Morrison, look at writers who took their time, and remember that, and I find, though it took me longer than I expected to finish this book is better for every day that it took, because I would like to think, generally speaking, we're a little wiser, every day we live. And so, yeah, it was like things would keep happening. Like there's a whole section on Matthew Shepard, and that was a really significant, painfully significant event. And I was like, are people even going to care? And then the Pulse nightclub shooting happened. And then that church shooting in I was reading the Laramie Project when it happened, but the church shooting in South Carolina happened. And I say that just because all of a sudden people were like, this isn't the America I know. Yes, it is. And that's literally the text in the Laramie Project. People going, this is not the Laramie I know. Yes, it is. So because I took time, it was like I was able to go, wow, and so it's not like there's no moment in the book where I'm like, Trump, look out, but clearly I was influenced by seeing this terrifying white supremacist, sexist fantasy being forwarded in the White House and by so many other people. And it was disturbingly familiar to a kid who went to Louisville High School, home of the Fighting Farmers. Hi. Y'all have had the best seats in the house, and I've been like, they're just living, VIP. Hi.
Actually haven't had the honor to read your book yet.
Okay. I would not go back to that space. I wouldn't wish that space on anyone. Though, unfortunately, if we are blessed with love, we will know grief. We will know loss. It's how it works. And the loss makes it valuable, right? It was very difficult. I wrote some essays in the year after my mom passed away. And it's funny, when it came time to include that same information in the book, initially I was like, oh, I could just copy and paste, and for me, it wasn't just me trying to be lazy. I was like, this is really hard, and if I can make this in any way easier, and it didn't work. The writing, and some of it, I published it like on essence.com, and online sites like that. It was too raw and too specific to my state of mind at that time, that when 5 or 6 years later I was trying, it was like, it didn't even make sense. It was like someone else wrote it. And I think someone else did write it. Grief changes us, It's so humanizing. You're not who you were before. But I think, sometimes lightning strikes and we have a life galvanizing moment and art comes out of it. Sometimes that does happen. It's true. I think you have to be very careful not to try to keep recreating that dynamic. Because you see in the book, actually in that chapter, a dude is gonna try to kill me. You're right, y'all are like, what happened? You will soon learn. At one point that night, I go into a room with him and he locks the door. I think I would hope if any of you were in the situation, you would go, well, now I want out. In that moment, I think, maybe I'll get a poem out of this. So I want to caution you from that dance, thinking like, oh no, this is good because it worked one time. It worked one time. Be lucky you survived that experience. But I think, just read and focus on the discipline. You are always you. And so the work will happen. But I don't think you need to intentionally keep yourself in hell to keep writing. I don't think so. I don't think we owe anyone anything but our humanity. I think when we do something that works for us and is sincere, it resonates anyway. But yeah, I don't think just pain for pain. You don't owe anyone your pain. Yeah, that's a great question. Writers' museums are great. Yeah, because often, when you write a memoir and an identity is a part of it, you end up just talking about identity, and that's fine. But it's like I could talk to you about grammar, not really, but one of the more valuable things my editor did generally was that he protected me from thinking about deadlines. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm taking so long. He'd say, don't worry about it. Just do what you need to do. Like he really kept, and I didn't even realize it always, but really I think he was frankly keeping the publisher at bay, and they were well-intended. They were excited, but if I had gotten that enthusiasm, it would have just worn me out. So he did a good job of, the only time I got deadlines until I finished the book. Once you finish the book, then it's like, actually, we got to get this thing printed and da-da-da, so then it is different. But until then, I would only get deadlines when I asked for them. And I thought that was deeply valuable. And I don't know, we all need different kinds of editors and stuff, but I was like, I'm going to need to be able to text you. I can't, some people, will write like 100 pages, turn it in, not hear from their editor for 4 months, and then they just get like a 9-page letter on the draft, and that's it. And then they go off again. And I was like, are you crazy? Are you crazy? I was like, I'm working this high-stakes job. At my peak in terms of responsibility at BuzzFeed when I was executive editor of culture, I was managing like 20, 30 people. So I was like, I don't have time to work on something for 6 months and then throw away all that material, So we were in touch and rhythm with each other. And so I would, regularly get feedback from him because I needed to know I was on the right course. And the last thing I'd say, because I'm a poet, it meant a lot that he edited with attention to the line. And that's actually very rare. I felt like he edited like a poet. And so I think preserving the lyricism and everything, that's in part because of him, because writing a memoir is so much work. I see why bad writing in books happen, because you're trying to do something that's so ambitious, you forget about the sentence. But he never let me forget, and I'm so grateful. Yeah.
All right, thank you all very much for being here tonight.
Hi, Carson.
Thank you, Saeed, so much.
Thank you so much, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you.